just take a second to revisit the principles that are guiding this project, which are Martin Luther King Jr.'s 6 principles of nonviolent activism. Number 1, the end does not justify the means. The means must also be pure. In order for our goals to be morally justified, so must our actions leading up to it. Number 2, we must avoid violence at all costs, even when violence is inflicted upon us. In addition to physical violence, we must also seek to avoid what King calls internal violence of the spirit, which we discussed in episode 1. Number 3, the ethic of agape love must serve as the foundation for our activism. And this type of love is selfless, transcending any concern for others' approval for our actions or beliefs. Number 4, our activism should target the system or systems that cause injustice to occur rather than targeting specific individuals. Number 5, self-suffering is intrinsic to participation in nonviolent activism, and we must accept this suffering while refusing to inflict it upon others. And number 6, within human nature, there's always potential for good. Nonviolent activism must appeal to the good that exists within all people, even the most stubborn opponents. When it comes to something like the violent insurrection at the nation's capital on January 6th, it's pretty easy to see how the participants in that mob action failed to live up to these principles. But that's not really what this podcast or what this project is about. What I'm focused on is in creating art that reflects on contentious social and political events like the insurrection. How can we, in the creation of that art, abide by these principles, even when we know that the subject of our art, such as violent insurrectionists, had no interest whatsoever in abiding by these same principles? In fact, it's pretty clear if you read through the principles and read through King's writings and speeches, he fully understood that most people who attempted to abide by these principles would be confronting others who had no interest in abiding by the same principles. And he also knew that it would be very difficult to do and frustrating. For example, when talking about principle number 3, that the ethic of agape love must serve as the foundation of our activism, he was clear to make a distinction between love in the sense of agape love and simply the experience of liking someone. In summary, he said, it's a good thing that the principle here is not to like our opponents, our political opponents, because there are a lot of people who are not very likable. That's not what is being asked by this principle of abiding by agape love. Even if you don't like someone, even if you vigorously disagree with their ideology, their ideas, their speech, their behavior, or the consequences of their behavior, the ethic of agape love is that in your encounter with a political opponent, you will stand firm in your commitment to the idea that the fullest expression of human being is an expression of our highest virtues, of compassion, of care, of empathy, an embrace of truth. And the ethic of agape love suggests that when we are encountering a political opponent, or even someone we just don't like, We will resist the temptation to indulge in fear or anger in response to that person's behavior. When one is interacting with others consistent with the ethos of agape love, it is clear in the moment that a response of anger or fear, which might lead us to attack or to belittle the other, would diminish us rather than allow us to express the full truth of human being. If this sounds somewhat theological, it is, because Martin Luther King's principles are based on his religious worldview. I don't think you need to be a committed religious believer in the same way that he was to understand his principle. We can put the idea of agape love in secular or non-religious terms simply by saying that when we are abiding by the principle of agape love, which is a universal human capacity, we are allowing ourselves to move beyond or transcend our limited sense of self to experience a broader or deeper sense of self that is connected to all others and, in fact, all beings. When you are speaking from a place of agape love, it becomes clear that the choice of self-transcendence is preferable, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it will cause some momentary suffering, even if it will precipitate more violence inflicted upon yourself. Basically, to be in the headspace of, or maybe we should say the heart space of agape love, is moment to moment to prefer the expansion of our sense of self over and above the constriction of our sense of self, which might seem safe, but which is actually another form of internal violence of the spirit. In other words, when we give in to a reaction of anger or fear and we turn in, we're cutting ourselves off from a version of ourselves which is more fulfilled and more self-expressed and more truthful. And that cutting off of the self from the self is a form of internal violence of the spirit. Another way to put it is the ethos of agape love compels us to prefer integrity over anger and fear, where integrity requires us to embrace the other even when we don't like the other, because on some level we have an awareness of the truth that there is no ultimate separation between the other and myself. So if you can imagine trying to take that principle and abide by it while you're creating choreography or music or visual art that responds to contentious social issues, you can see how that would be a difficult task, but hopefully it would also be a process that would yield something beautiful or something moving or at least something thought-provoking.